What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Behind the Door podcast. I'm Brandon Brown. My co-host is not here today, Jeremy Hillswell. We're giving him some big love. He's out in the world doing some really important things, as always. Thank you for tuning in. For those of you who are faithful listeners, you'll remember our guest today, Nicole Lemay. We did an episode with her about a year ago when she was pretty fresh in her re-entry from prison. Really powerful and impactful story. We got a lot of positive feedback on your story, Nicole. And we're here today just to talk 1 year later, to hear about how your life's going and how your reentry's going, and just inspire the people through your story, because you're doing some pretty special things. So thank you for being here today. And how you feeling?
You know, I'm just living my best life. I never thought that I would be at this place,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and it really gives me hope for other people that, you know, like when I came out, people probably were like putting bets on how soon I'd be back in,
Yeah.
you know, and I used to be one of those people that, you know, we'd be inside kind of like making fun of the people that would come back because we didn't understand it.
Yeah.
So now it's just different for me.
What do you think? Why do you think that is? Like, because I can relate to that too. You know, seeing people getting out and feeling like, you know, that person's not going to succeed, and it'll be like, you know, so long before we see him back. And I haven't even really thought about that in the 3 years that I've been home. But, you know, from your perspective, what do you think that's a coping mechanism? What do you think it is? Like this idea of, even as a prisoner, seeing people releasing, like this belief that most people are going to fail.
I think it really goes because we're not healed yet.
Mm-hmm.
When you're in prison, you're not healing. And I think now I'm on my road to healing, so I'm a nicer person, and like I'm more, you know, I just have a kinder heart.
Yeah.
Like when you're in prison, you have to have this like tough side, and honestly, you're kind of down and out. Like even if you're doing everything, doing all the things in prison, school, working, have good family connections, you're still locked up. So how are you going to wish someone else well when you're not well?
That's a really good point. I mean, we talk about kind of that topic a lot, like the process of healing and the importance of what it brings into your life and how it kind of gives you a new perspective on things. And I'm just flashing back to a year ago, you know, when you came on the podcast. I think it was like our 4th or 5th episode, actually. And, you know, talking to you about where you were at that point, you were just like a few months out, you know, finding your way into the workforce, finding your way into, you know, some communities and some circles that really felt like inspirational to you. And what's changed for you in the last year in terms of like your professional and your personal life? Like, what's the trajectory that you've been on?
I mean, I think the baseline of it is that I have so much community support and people that believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And really, that's like really what pushed me forward. I didn't have any self-confidence like that I was going to do anything special. And the bigger my circle grew, the more it kind of gave me the momentum to get where I am. So like now instead of just doing, well, actually since the podcast, I wasn't even working for Jeremy.
Yeah.
So those of you that don't know, the day of the podcast, Jeremy says to me, "Hey, you want to come work for me?" And then I said, "You don't have a female house." I was running one small female house, recovery house. And I said, "You have a female house?" And he says, "Come work for the guys' houses." I was like, you know what? I've never done that, but I'll give it a try. So I started out like getting the funding for people and working closely with MAR to get people funding so they didn't have that barrier. And then it just really sped up from there. And Jeremy really believed in me that I could handle such a big role. So now I'm the program manager at Recovery Housing of Maine.
Let's give kudos for the listeners. Go ahead and snap if you're listening.
You know, and oh, I just want to cry because I literally love the people that I support so much because, you know, they're doing it. Okay. And it's just so cool to see. And I do a lot of reentry. We've had at least probably 25 people reenter into the programs in the year that I've, you know, worked there. So it's just really cool. And now I go into the prisons and get to represent and see people that I was in there with. And also people that have come back since. And it's heartbreaking, but it's like, if I can give them that one little glimmer of hope, I love that.
And so, you know, you said before that, like, for you, one of the big things that pushed you forward and, like, you know, kind of put you on the path you're on now, like, really experiencing some success in life, like, some of the things that a lot of people come home that they don't experience financial stability, right? Stable housing and some of those things. Like now you're also kind of like providing that community and that support for people. And so it's got to feel really good for you to come full circle, because you came out feeling like that lack of confidence, and you came home like not necessarily feeling like you were good enough to be in the spaces that you're in now. And so now for you, actually trying to create and replicate those spaces for other people has got to be work that feels really meaningful to you.
One of my favorite roles that I have is reentry work. So like I'll go pick somebody up at the prison, and I have like a whole routine that I do now because I've done it so much. But like we'll go visit the horse farm that I worked at and I found healing at. And then I'll take them out to lunch. I'll take them shopping so they're supported and they have that, so they're not afraid of all that. And people come to me all the time asking for reentry advice, and it's like I don't know everything, but I feel like I can give them a little bit of insight on what works and what doesn't work. So a lot of my ladies at the house that have gotten out on home confinement, now they completed IOP, they are working, they're doing all the things, they're getting relationships back with their children, their families. It's just so beautiful to see. Like I can't even.
Yeah, it's amazing what you can do when you have like a supportive group of people around you, a group of people that are like inspiring you, that you can kind of make those changes in your life and finally start to get stuff in order, and that you don't have to be like held back by this idea that like, oh, you're an ex-prisoner or an ex-drug addict or somebody maybe who's still struggling, right? And we have like all of these stories being told about us, and what you're doing is creating a new space for people to kind of like exchange more like intimate and honest stories that aren't about the past but about possibility in the future. And it's been really refreshing, as you, one of my closest friends, like to see you really come into yourself and like find your voice and find your presence in this community, and be somebody that when you walk down the street, people look at and they know you, right? And they know the work you're doing, and they really like appreciate the way that you show up for people. And that's a really big part of the system that we talk about on the podcast a lot, is like there's not enough times where people are showing up for system impacted people or for people who are in active addiction. We try to keep that at an arm's length because it can be uncomfortable sometimes. But I look at you and look how you've really found like your heart and your passion by extending an arm to where not enough arms are extended. And it's a really beautiful thing to see. And I think some of the women and the men you work with are succeeding because of that arm, right? And so, but I'm also wondering for you, like, you're doing great work, and, you've got 2 jobs, right? And, you stay very, very busy, like so many of us that just like want to grab a hold of this and try to change the system. But like, you're also now in your 2nd year of reentry. And so despite all the things that are going really good for you, what are some of the things that you face? What are some of the obstacles, some of the things that you've had to overcome just figuring out your reentry journey now in year 2?
All right. So on the minimal scale, I hate grocery shopping.
Yeah, I do too.
I get overcharged all the time getting Instacart, and it's crazy. So I just, and I don't know why, because I love food, but I just hate going into a grocery store and trying to pick out everything. And I didn't even do that much time, so it's crazy that that's even a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't like to shop anymore. And back in the day, I used to love to shop. But really on a real level, it's like trying to find balance in like rekindling relationships. Like a lot of people that I was really close with reach out to me, and I don't know what it is, but it's like hard for me to like make the move to actually go and spend time with them. Like I was really close to my ex's family, right? And like they were like my biggest supporters. And it's like those are people that I love so much, and they've been loving watching my, come up and my comeback. But at the same time, I don't know what it is, but it's like hard for me to take the step to really like go. And like I know it's gonna be emotional, and that's probably why I'm like holding back. And it's like, I'm not ashamed of my story because I know they'll be proud of me, like, for where I am today. But it's just, I don't know, it's hard to, like, connect with some people, right? And then relationships, like, I feel like I'm emotionally unavailable to all guys. Like, I'm not good at dating. And I think it's just because I'm so independent. I'm, like, hyper independent.
Mm-hmm.
Now I provide for myself. Like, I don't need anything from anybody. And I think I just, like, just working.
Do you think that that comes from, because like when I'm hearing you say that, and that's definitely something that I can relate to and that I talk a lot about, is like one of the things I struggle the most with is like the personal relationships and the interpersonal relationships. And 50% of it is because I feel like if I'm taking the time to like just hang out and just chill and connect with somebody who's like really important to me, that I'm not doing the transformative stuff, like changing the system. And if I'm like every minute I take away from my focus of my work to, develop like my own personal relationships, or even just to relax sometimes by myself gives me anxiety. And do you think that part of that, like that hyper independence and that like the drive, because that's one thing that anybody who knows you knows, is like you're driven, right? You're always trying to go out and get it for other people. You're always trying to find people resources. You're always trying to take whatever opportunities you can to like become even more independent and more successful. And do you think it's because like when we were in prison, just like being completely stripped of everything and having no independence and no agency and depending on the system to provide for us everything that we needed, do you think that's one of the reasons why you feel like this constant drive to always have to be doing something, even if it means taking away from like those really healthy self-help, what's the word I'm looking for? Like not, yeah, self-care. Like it's something that I know you and I talk about all the time that we both struggle with. Where do you think it comes from?
I think it comes from a lot of things. It's like I used to have a pretty decent life before, substance use, before prison. So I know what the good life tastes like, right? So it's going from that to, the most traumatizing thing I probably ever experienced is being in a county jail. And I've done 4 years of incarceration over a period of time. Like there was like a couple 6-month stints in there, and it was so traumatizing to me. And I think in my head, I like replay those moments more than the prison moments, because, like you're just really not treated good. So there's that. And then also sometimes I'm overly available for other people. And I think that's my traumas coming through. I feel like if I don't take a call or schedule a screening to get someone into the program, like, are they going to die waiting for me? Are they going to sit in prison and rot? And those aren't realistic things all the time, but that's kind of like the pressure that I put on myself. It's like, like if someone's ready for treatment, if someone's ready to get safe and get healthy, like, I want to be available. And a lot of the times it's like, I know that when I was, when I first got introduced to the system, I didn't get a chance. Like I wasn't really given opportunities to do programs like this. It was like, okay, well, here's probation. We know you're going to mess up on it anyway, but here you go.
It's interesting because you just said something that we've been talking a lot about recently, which is this idea of like, gauging the amount of attention and work you're doing with somebody, even whether it's in your professional capacity or in your own personal life, of like how much of yourself you're giving to other people and what you're kind of looking at is at stake. And so, you said that like, I want to make sure if somebody's at that moment where they're ready, that I'm available to help them and support them. And how do you manage the other side of that, right? When people aren't ready, when somebody might have like a hint that they want to make a change and they want to get help, or even in a personal relationship that somebody wants to like, heal with you and grow with you, but it's not enough, right? Like they're not ready to really step into it and do that investment. How do you figure out those boundaries and any type of relationships where you're not pouring yourself completely into somebody who's not ready to receive it?
Yeah, and like I've really learned, like especially working with RCOM and with Jeremy, like the clinicians here give me a lot of good supervision on it. And sometimes it's really hard. Yeah. And every time, like say that we have to like ask somebody to leave a house, like that takes a little piece of my heart every time, because I know what's out there for them. Yeah. Right. Well, like people that are like kind of like on the fence, I'm just there when I can be, and they can text me. Like I have one person that stays in contact with me pretty regularly, like almost on the daily, and it's like, these are the options for you. Whenever you're ready, like I can help you get to them. Yeah. And I think making good community partners, like I'm pretty friendly with a lot of these organizations that can, like the detoxes, the other recovery homes, the lower barrier facilities. It's like just having options for people, I think, is a big deal, because some people might not be ready for all the things.
Yeah.
But can we get them into safe housing so they can leave their boyfriend or their partner, through a different program? Like sometimes that's what it looks like.
Yeah. And what would your advice be to somebody who's looking to kind of like, follow in your footsteps in some kind of way? Somebody who's, about to get out or is fresh out of the system, or somebody who's getting ready to go into the system. What's your advice for somebody that wants to really get involved and, be a part of that community and extend that community to other people? Because it's not easy, right? It's pretty hard work.
Yeah.
And so what would you tell to somebody who's like, man, how can I kind of pursue the same path that you went?
Yeah, so this happened a lot. Like the same conversation happened. I was just at the prison on Tuesday, and there's like hundreds of people. It seemed like maybe I'm being dramatic, but there was a lot of people, and a lot of them I knew, and they kind of asked, like, and when we talk about how much time do you have, like if they say 4 years, 2 years, even a year, I'm like, okay, get enrolled in school, because for me, education really set me free in a way. Like I wouldn't have been able to do any of these roles without, education. Like I'm just putting it for my licensing for my CADC. So it's like, if you're going into the system, start right there, get into school, get into any program you can right from the get-go, and then doing as much volunteering, that type of stuff. But then when you get out, you really got to have a good support system. And sometimes that's not family. A lot of people hope that their family has changed just because they have, and that's not the case. I really lucked out because I had you, I had Opportunity Scholars, I had this big network of people that just wrapped me up. And I don't know what it would have been like if I didn't have that.
Yeah, and a big shout out to the Opportunity Scholars. If you don't know, which most people probably don't, but look up the Opportunity Scholars in Maine. People that are really pursuing education during and after incarceration, and really trying to spread the opportunities for people to pursue education, because that's one of the things that bonded you and me. From the very beginning was this like possibility of becoming educated in prison, and how that really set up for us, like rethinking what we were capable of when we come home. And I've seen you really in the same way experience the same thing that I did, where you come home and you're still in school and you have this hunger to finish it, but you also have obstacles, and you have like everyday things that you're learning. Like, I got to gear myself up for 2 hours before I go to the grocery store, and that can take away from doing homework. You know what I'm saying? Because it's that I do get that much anxiety about it. But, for you, it's a really important success story for people to hear, because you were in the middle of your degree when you came home. Right. So you experienced higher education in prison, and then carried that out with you in your reentry, and stayed focused and stayed determined to finish your degree. And like you just mentioned, now you're about to become a certified alcohol and drug counselor, getting your actual accreditation from the state to do that work. And that's going to open up a whole new pathway for you, not just in your capabilities working with people in recovery, but also in the work you do with young people and the youth advocacy that you do as well. And so shout out to anybody who's out there pursuing higher education in prison, or coming home and staying on that path to pursue higher education, because it really does reframe for you what's possible in your life. When you come home with an education, or when you finish your education after you've come home, it gives you like a new sense of confidence. It gives you a new sense of possibility. It really like makes you realize in a lot of ways that I can be in the room with other students who haven't finished or haven't experienced the traumas of our criminal legal system, and I can kind of hang with them, right? And so if I can hang with them, then I can probably hang with professionals. I can probably hang with other people. And so I've seen you really establish your confidence through education. So just shout out to all the work that's happening in Maine and across the country for people pursuing education while incarcerated and after, because it really is a huge thing, and something that we're always connecting with people across the country through that lens of being an incarcerated and formerly incarcerated student. So what's your plan with your CADC now that you've got it?
I really want to, and you and I talk about this a lot, like I have this vision about creating space for youth. Some people don't know there aren't many youth substance use treatment places at all. There's no services really And if there are services, they take over, you know, months and months to get into. So most of the youth that I work with have some type of substance use history. And we're talking like 14, 15, 16, 17 years old. So that kind of like sets them up to be an adult that uses.
Yeah.
And if we could kind of like change that path for them at a young age, you know, I think they'd have like a greater success. And then also I do want to, I don't know, I feel like I counsel people all the time. Like, and I'm just, you know, sometimes, you know, it just happens naturally, but I wouldn't mind, you know, doing a little one-on-one too. I think that would be really good work. But yeah, I just kind of like waiting it out. And I know like one of the barriers that I face is that like I just put into the state licensing board, and the real shitty part is they're going to send it back and say you have this much criminal history.
Mm-hmm.
So then I have to go in front of the board. I have to first type it out, tell them why I have all these charges, and then, you know, really have a team of people to come and say this person deserves to be approved.
Yeah, I mean that's a big topic, right? Is like I think it's something that keeps a lot of people from pursuing certain, you know, career pathways or social pathways. Is like this idea of like, oh, I'm really busting my ass to like learn and to grow and to heal, and then I get to a point where I have to basically apply for something that's going to be denied because of my criminal history, and in some ways it kind of makes us internalize, you know, the narratives about the things we've done wrong. Like we start to see ourselves in that light, but you know, for you to be like, you know, ready for that kind of battle to say like, okay, I know I have some questions I have to answer, and that's okay. Like, yeah, I made mistakes, but I'm out here, I'm doing important work, right? I'm out here, you know, making a difference. I'm out here, you know, affecting my community in a really positive way. But some people just aren't ready to kind of like rise to that occasion because of the fear of rejection or the fear of, you know, having to relive the mistakes you made just so you can progress forward in your life.
It feel like going to like trial again, right? Like being on trial, right? Like, okay, why did these things happen? And that's okay. But for like a person that isn't, that doesn't have support, as much support, like that might be really scary. Like me, I love to win. So, I mean, there's really no ethical reason that they can, you know, shoot me down once the process starts.
Yeah. You know, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about all these things we're talking about. I'm thinking about a year ago when, you know, when we had your first episode with the podcast. And, you know, for anybody who's like meeting Nicole in this episode for the first time, you know, your story is really powerful. You know, you're somebody that, you know, you've been very open about getting addicted to drugs because of, you know, basically some injuries that you had and some, you know, the prescription that you had, and then how that kind of spiraled into not just doing drugs, but also selling drugs and, you know, like really changing everything about your life previous to that injury to, you know, now like really living this life of like, you know, being held hostage by, you know, doing and selling drugs to support yourself and kind of feed your addiction. And I look at you now and you're out here and you're like really a beacon of hope for people. But like what, you know, what would you tell to anybody who's listening that's, you know, kind of in that space right now where they're experiencing like a little bit of hopelessness, like I'm not going to be able to turn it around. I'm not going to be able to change and kind of get over the things that I'm dealing with because you've done it. So what would your advice be for people?
You know, sometimes, and I deal with this a lot, like even people that aren't actively using, but people that are early in recovery, they have this fear of going to work or doing other things, volunteering because of the judgment. And I think the biggest thing that's helped me is like I learned to really love at least some things about myself. I started there. Like you really got to do the work within yourself and just appreciate yourself. And then the healing kind of grows from there. But I mean, that's way harder than it. I say it like it's easy, but it's not. But yeah, I don't know, just like starting small and just appreciating the small opportunities and just keep going. You know, like people used to like kind of tease me because I would take every opportunity and I would take every opportunity like it was such a big deal. And I still do. Like I love if someone asks me to go to an event, I go. Recently I was on the governor's opioid webinar, and the Maine Association of Recovery Residents asked me to be their guest speaker. So I was like, yeah, of course I'll do it. So just take the opportunity and just, be true to yourself. Don't worry about what other people think, which I still do sometimes.
Another part of the episode that we did last time with you that was really powerful for people to think was like, we had some discussions around like the fact that reentry and even addiction and some of these things are experienced a lot differently for women than they are for men, right? Like it's in some ways like some of the root issues are the same, but the actual experience of reentry for women is very different. And you've gotten to a point now where you manage a house for women who are in recovery and in reentry. And so what are some of the lessons or things that you're noticing, things that you're seeing that like really continue to be unique for women in this space that you think like we need to change systemically? What are some of the thoughts that you have now that you've been doing the work and seeing it's not just your experience, you're seeing the experience of, dozens of other women who are, dealing with the same issues that you dealt with. And so just from that kind of like gendered perspective, what are some of the things that you think we really need to start talking about and thinking about more specifically when it comes to women who are reentering society after incarceration?
Yeah, so I definitely don't think there's enough support for women. And I think the issues that women face are much different than men. One of the issues that I see a lot is, and this is kind of like a sensitive thing, right? Is women either getting in relationships with men and kind of being vulnerable to that right when they get out. And I think we might have touched on this a little bit, but it's like men really, some men really prey on women that are just re-entering. So a lot of those traumas come back up. So is there enough support for women in relationships, right? Like the relationships and having healthy relationships. Is there enough support inside that will help them on the outside? And a lot of programs have like very specific rules around like relationships and whatnot. And I don't want to do that because I want women to, I don't want to make them feel like they're being stereotyped.
Do you think like if you're in a program that like outlaws relationships, like you can't be in a relationship for the first 120 days, and I'm just making numbers up here, but like, you can't be in a relationship for 120 days. Do you think at the end of like, is that damaging for somebody? Like what is that signaling to them about, because I understand that, the thought behind it is because we need you to work on yourself, we need you to work on your recovery, but especially for people coming out of prison, I mean, you're coming out of prison where you've been, completely deprived of like, a healthy relationship and intimacy and interactions and, coming out and, do you think that maybe sometimes that acts as like the fuel for people getting into bad relationships?
I mean, it's both and, right? Like if we make I do think that some programs have a lot of success because a lot of relationships in early recovery and reentry are not healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And I see these programs and I was like, I love what you do. So sometimes if like, let's say for instance, a woman is struggling with that, like let's say they're having a relationship that's affecting them inside our program,
Mm-hmm.
I do refer them to a program that is more catered to those issues. But sometimes it's like, if you put such strong restrictions on people, it might push them to go and move in with whoever's going to let them, So like if they have this unhealthy male in their life, you're kind of like pushing them towards it more. So I would rather keep people, wrapped in support and support them through it and coach them through it rather than
Like make them aware of what a healthy relationship looks like and maybe what aspects of a relationship aren't healthy that they're in that moment. What do you think it is like? Because I know that this is something that is like certain aspects of it are unique to women, right? Like there's certain narratives that women come home facing, whether that's, this pressure to like jump right back into the mother role or, just like who you're supposed to be as a woman after prison and the stigma you face as a woman who is in prison is very, very unique. But I've also seen that relationships are like sometimes the demise for men and women who are in early reentry or early recovery. And so I guess one of my questions is like, what do you think it is that makes us as a population gravitate towards these unhealthy relationships when we're early on in that?
I'll keep it real. I think it's like, You know, some people, like, when you have had a traumatic life, that chaos feels good. It feels like home.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's what you're used to. And some people, like, they're just so codependent on it. And in prison, it's like you kind of have to be dependent on other people, right?
And on the system itself.
Yeah, the whole system, right? So it's like you can't get out of your own way. So some people tend to depend on other people for that support. And even if it's not the healthy support that they really need.
Yeah, you know, a friend of mine who you knew as well, you know, Bobby Paco Paysan, you know, passed away in a car accident, and we've talked about him a lot on the podcast before, but he used to say something that just came up for me when you were speaking, is like, you know, anybody, like, there's not a real big difference between positive and negative attention. It's attention. Right. And so anybody who, you know, anybody who's ever starved for attention in their life knows that negative attention still gets you the result that you're looking for sometimes, because it's like, okay, somebody's finally paying attention to me. And so maybe that's a part of it, right? Is like, even in a negative, toxic, unhealthy relationship, it's like, but I still have those moments where this person's paying attention to me. Maybe they're fighting me because they love me, right? And, you know, when you've gone through that process of having nothing and like just wondering when somebody's going to come along that's going to value you, you don't actually know what that value looks like afterwards. And, you know, I've seen a lot of people too, a lot of men and women who are both in reentry get involved in relationships together. And it's like almost twice as dysfunctional because both person is like needing this validation and this, you know, like, I don't even know how to love, but I want to love and I want to be loved, and I don't know what that looks like. And, you know, it's like even the negative aspects of those relationships, after all the dust settles, feels positive because it makes you feel something.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it too is, you know, when we don't love ourselves, how are we going to teach anyone else to love us? Right? So probably, you know, something I'm really proud of, and it's like these small things and these small, like, little rainbows I see in the work I do. I mean, there's a lot of big ones too, but when women, you know, just the other day, somebody that I'm very close with, you know, she was kind of like hanging out with somebody here and there. And then she realized, you know what, I'm just not ready for this. This isn't what I want. Like, I love myself, so I'm not just going to settle. Like, a year ago, I would have just said, pick me, I'm the one. And now she loves herself so much that she's not willing to settle for something that doesn't feel right.
Yeah, it's not pick me, I'm the one. It's I'm waiting for the one to pick.
And just, to me, that was such a beautiful moment. And I was like fangirling her, just staring at her, watching the conversation go down. You know, you know, I feel like I'm a coach of the baddies, right?
I love it. It's hilarious. So, you know, one other thing that I want to talk with you about is, you know, like, you came into the kind of the scene early on when we decided to do this podcast, and, you know, you've really been on this journey, and you work with Jeremy and you work with me, and we're like, we have this beautiful community together. And, you know, also you're always at the events with the door, right? Like, anytime we bring the door somewhere, you know, you're at those events by our side, and you're telling the story and you're talking to people about how special it is. But I think the most, you know, the biggest leap, the biggest thing that's happened for you with the door so far is that we're about to, you know, 4 days from now, drive this door down to Philadelphia and, you know, do a pretty cool panel with some pretty amazing people. Shout out to PD Green, you know, an educational program that tutors people and trains people to become tutors inside jails and prisons, and, you know, really spreading the message of the value and the hope of education inside of the carceral space. You know, invited us to come down and participate in some stuff with them. So we're bringing the door down to Philly. Aside from that, one thing that you know, we haven't really talked about it enough, like even just in our friendship, but I'm just interested from your perspective, like, what's powerful about the door to you? Like, what is it about this prison door, about Jeremy's prison door, the actual cell door that he was incarcerated behind, that he now has in his possession? What is it that's like exciting or meaningful to you about that?
Some people look at it as taboo, right? Like, why would you want that? It's ugly, it's cold, it's rusty. People probably peed all over it at one point in time. Who knows, right? But to me, it's like hope. Like, my boss, Jeremy Hiltz, he's a real boss, because who gets a prison door given to them?
Yeah.
Like, who?
But even one step later, like, who asks for their actual prison door? And you bring up a really important thing, because this is something that we've experienced on some of our trips, right? Like when we you know, this, for those of you who are listening, I'm sitting next to the prison door. It's about 180 pounds, right? It's solid steel, I think, metal of some kind. It's ugly, right? And it's, if you've ever been in prison or jail, you know what this is when you see it. And so we've had people come up to us and react and be like, "Man, like why, like why?" And I'm not touching it. I don't want to be photographed with it and all those things. We definitely get that reaction sometimes. But when we tell the story about how we've made this ugly thing into something that is inspirational and is hopeful, and something that used to contain us into a cage, we now bring with us wherever we want to go. And, you know, so like, you know, for you, you've gone some places with us and you've seen people's reactions, and, you know, but I think for somebody who's listening who might be thinking like, I don't really know how I feel about like the actual door, like, why is it meaningful to you when you're in its presence, when you help us unload it from a van and wheel it somewhere?
You know, it really brings people, like system impacted people, together, and it starts conversations. Like, you know, I have photographs of myself and one of my, you know, new friends from California. And so we were like in front of the door just taking pictures and stuff. And it's like, it just builds that, like, oh, you know, like, what are you up to now? Like, yada, yada, yada. It's like connection, but it's also freedom. It's like, you know, this door is heavy, but it doesn't hold me down.
That's a beautiful way to put it, because it is heavy and it doesn't hold us down anymore. In fact, it's doing the opposite, right? Is it's elevating the story of people who are still behind the doors and who have been behind the doors, but also people who are behind other oppressive doors like this. And that's why we can use it as a beacon and a conversation piece for issues around recovery and around community and around the need for supportive connecting systems and people in your life. And, you know, it's one of those things where it's still the strangest story in the world how, you know, how Jeremy got the door and asked the DOC and they said no, and they said no, and they said yes. And, you know, people always ask, I've never talked to anybody about this prison door without the next question being, how did you get it? Right. And so for us, it's like, it is a fun part of the story, how Jeremy was able to get the door. But I think the bulk of the story now exists in where this door has gone, right? Where it held people behind it and you couldn't go anywhere. You know, I was locked in my cell for 13 years from, you know, anywhere from 5:30 at night to 8:30 at night, all the way until 7 o'clock the next morning, not able to go anywhere, not able to do anything. And now it's the opposite, right? And so to use it as a piece of art and to see the way that even you, as, you know, somebody who's in this community with us, glows when you're around the door, when you talk about it, like, you know, it's something that's really special, and it's how we know that it has power too. And so, you know, looking forward to, you know, traveling more for the door with you, but also for you to talk about some of the things we're talking about on this episode today, which is like, you know, for us, this is our door, you know, two white men who were incarcerated in the state of Maine, and this is Jeremy's actual door, and I was behind doors exactly like it for many years. But for you, you know, having the platform to be able to talk about women-specific issues, and for us to connect with some of our partners to talk about the racial disparities and disproportions in our prison that are represented by this door, and to really use it to shine a light on something is something special. And it's what really gives it the power is it's almost that, because the door gives people pause, is what gives it the power, right? Because it forces people to stop, think, reflect, why, what, when, where. And then we get to talk about issues that without the door maybe would be a lot harder to talk about. Yeah. And so I'm excited to keep traveling, you know, around with this door, with you and with Jeremy and with the beautiful community we've created. And, you know, hopefully people keep tuning in and keep listening and, you know, show up at some of the places we'll be at. If, you know, if you're there, connect with us. And, you know, we look forward to just continuing to spread the message and these narratives of hope. Yours is a narrative of hope, right? I'm super proud of you and the work that you're doing. And, you know, I just want to give a shout out to everybody who's listening in, everybody who follows, who subscribes, who downloads, anybody that shows us love on social media. You know, this has been another episode of Behind the Door podcast with our special guest, Nicole Lemay. And we look forward to coming at you soon with more content.